The wind didn't howl, it screamed. It tore across the Wyoming plains like a banshee, slamming snow sideways against the cabin walls, rattling loose boards and slipping through cracks like ghost fingers. Inside, Martha Bell shoved another log into the iron stove, her hands raw and red, breath clouding the air. The fire sizzled and spat. It wasn't enough to warm her bones, but it had to do. She pressed her back against the wall and stared into the flames. She'd always hated the quiet after a storm, but this storm didn't seem interested in ending. 3 days now, and it just kept coming. No birds, no coyotes, not even the creak of tree limbs under snow weight. Just white. The kind that blanketed the world and buried anything too stubborn to move. Martha wasn't stubborn. She was surviving. Again. She adjusted the quilt draped over her shoulders and sat at the edge of the table. The lamp flickered. She'd rationed the oil, kept the fire low, dried roots and venison strung up above. She'd made it through worse winters, she reminded herself. But this one felt hungrier. The silence cracked. At first, she thought it was the chimney shifting. Then the horses, but the stables were shut tight and buried in snow. No, this sound came from beyond the porch, a dull thud, like flesh meeting ground. Her hand went to the rifle propped beside the door. She hesitated only a breath before pulling on her coat and pushing into the cold. The storm hit her like a wall. Snow whipped her cheeks, cut through her skirts. She gritted her teeth, eyes narrow slits, moving slow, careful. A few yards out, near the edge of her corral, something lay slumped against the fence. A man, or what was left of one. She approached with the caution of a woman who's buried too many. A brown duster was frozen to his frame, face pale beneath blood and ice. Boots worn down to the stitching. One hand clutched the rail, the other hung limp. His lips moved, her rifle dropped. "God damn it," Martha muttered, crouching beside him. "You picked the wrong night to die, mister." He was barely conscious, mumbling nonsense, something about tracks and fire. No blood from the gut, no smell of rot. That was good. She didn't care who he was, only that he was still breathing. Against her better judgment, and it was better, she pulled him over her shoulder and staggered back to the cabin, boots slipping, lungs burning. Inside, she slammed the door shut with her boot and dropped him near the stove. He groaned. The sound was ugly, desperate. "Don't die on me now," she said, unwrapping his scarf, yanking off his ice-crusted gloves. His face was gaunt, cheeks split from frostbite, a deep gash across his brow. "Idiot," she muttered, rummaging for whiskey and bandages. "Only a fool travels in this mess, or a man running from something." She poured whiskey on a rag and dabbed the cut. He flinched but didn't wake. "No sense waking now," she said softly, working fast. "You'll wish you hadn't." She peeled off his coat, then paused. Pinned to his shirt was a battered brass badge, Cavalry, U.S. Army. Her stomach turned. Military meant trouble. "Of course," she said bitterly. "Why save a farmer or a tinker when I can drag in one of Uncle Sam's bleeding pawns?" Still, she cleaned him up, dressed the wound, and covered him with an extra quilt. He moaned, again, and shifted. Martha leaned against the wall and watched him. The storm kept howling. By midnight he hadn't stirred. She sat near the stove, book in hand, fingers trembling slightly. She hadn't read aloud in a year, but the silence pressed too hard against her thoughts, so she cracked her lips and let the words spill. And though the valley was deep and wide, she crossed it barefoot, carrying only the stone that remembered. Her name. Her voice was steady. The book had belonged to her boy. She could still see his thumbprints on the pages. She looked over. The stranger's eyes were open. He was staring at her with fever-glazed confusion. "You're safe," she said, startled but firm. "Don't move." His brow furrowed. "Where?" "My cabin. You were dying. I brought you in." He tried to sit up. She pushed him back gently. "You'll tear something. Just breathe." His eyes flicked around the room. Fire, walls, her. "Name's Luke," he said hoarsely. She didn't answer. "You saved me?" "I dragged you inside and didn't let you bleed out. Don't confuse it with sainthood." A faint smile. "Suits me fine." She studied him, unsure what to make of the grin. Probably just fever talk. Still, he didn't seem dangerous. Yet. "You Got family? She asked. Anyone looking for you? His eyes darkened. No. She didn't believe him but didn't press. You'll stay here until the storm breaks. After that, you're on your way. I don't plan on staying long. Good. She replied. Don't get used to the fire. He chuckled, then winced. Serves you right, she muttered. Luke drifted off again soon after, chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. Martha leaned back and exhaled. Her cabin felt even smaller now, filled with the sound of someone else breathing. At dawn, she was up before the sun. Snow still fell, but lighter now. She dressed, stepped outside and scanned the plains, nothing but white until she saw it, a rider, far off, just a shadow against the pale horizon. But moving fast, toward town. Martha's gut twisted. Someone had seen her drag Luke in, or saw him lying near the fence. Either way, the gossip train would be galloping. She went back inside, locking the door behind her. By noon, Luke was sitting, upright, sipping broth. He looked stronger, but his eyes kept flicking toward the windows. You expecting trouble? He asked. Always. He smirked, but it faded fast. You trust people? No. That makes two of us. She pulled a chair across from him. Why were you out there? No sane man rides into a snowstorm alone. He hesitated, then shrugged. Orders gone bad. People got shot who shouldn't have. I walked away. She narrowed her eyes. You deserted. Didn't deny it. Not the kind of uniform I wanted to die in. Martha said nothing. She stared at the stove. After a long pause, she whispered, I lost my boy last winter. Fever took him in 3 days. Luke looked down. I'm sorry. He was 10. He loved this book, she said, pointing at the one still open on the table. He nodded, respectful. You can stay till the storm clears, she said. Then you go and you don't tell anyone what you saw here. I owe you that much. You owe me nothing. I don't want favors. I want quiet. Outside, the wind began to ease, but Martha knew it wasn't over. The snow might stop falling, but the real storm was coming from town. They'd seen the rider, heard the whispers. A man in her cabin kept through the night. The same townsfolk, who hadn't lifted a hand when her son was dying, would come now with morals and pitchforks. Luke caught her glance toward the door. You expecting someone? He asked. She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. No, she said, but they're coming. He didn't ask who. He didn't have to. Instead, he set his empty bowl aside and stood slowly, gripping the back of the chair for balance. Then we better be ready. You're not part of this. I am now. She almost said no. Almost told him to lie low. Let her handle it, but something in his voice, calm, certain, no swagger, made her pause. You shoot? She asked. He nodded. Well enough to owe a few graves. Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. So then finish your soup, deserter. You might need the strength. Luke sat again, rubbing his chest where the bruises had bloomed. She turned toward the window, watching snow swirl through grey light. A figure on horseback crested the far ridge. Martha's grip tightened on the rifle beside the door. This was just the beginning. Martha stood stiff as timber as the rider dismounted. Snow flurried around the figure's bonneted head and stiff wool skirt, and Martha already knew who it was before the woman even knocked. Mrs. Agatha Perkins didn't knock so much as rap, like a schoolmarm scolding the door itself for insolence. She smelled of lavender soap and spite. Martha didn't bother pretending to smile. I saw smoke, Agatha said with tight lips, brushing snow off her shoulders. Thought you might need assistance. Woman alone, middle of a blizzard. Her gaze swept the room like a bayonet. Then it landed on the quilt-draped figure in the corner. Well now, she breathed. Martha moved to block her view, hands crossed. He was near dead when I found him, Martha said, cool and even. Pulled him from the fence line myself. I'm sure you did. The tension sharpened. Agatha's eyes gleamed with something that wasn't concern. Does the Reverend know? She asked. I wasn't aware saving lives needed his permission. Sheltering. A man unrelated to you in your home overnight, with no chaperone. Her lips pinched. It's not just scandalous, Martha. It's unbecoming of a woman trying to rejoin decent society. Martha didn't blink. I wasn't trying to rejoin anything. Mrs. Perkins sniffed like she smelled sin baking in the stove. Luke shifted under the quilt, groaning. His eyes cracked open just enough to meet Agatha's glare. He offered a ghost of a smile and muttered, "Ma'am?" Her nose wrinkled like he'd offered her a rat. "I'll pray for you," she declared, turning to the door. "Both of you." "No need," Martha said. "God's been quiet for some time." The door slammed, and with it, the last illusion of peace. By sundown, Martha spotted a second rider. This one headed not for her cabin, but toward the town proper, no doubt delivering fresh scandal, wrapped in righteous ribbon. She didn't speak much that evening, Luke noticed. "You always this quiet?" "Only when I know what's coming." He leaned back on the cot, face pale but eyes clear now. "That woman looked at me like I was a corpse sitting up." She would have preferred it. He chuckled weakly. Small towns, full of love and hospitality. Martha glanced out the window. The wind had finally stilled, but a new storm had begun, one made of judgment, fueled by gossip. "I buried a husband 5 years back," she said, "then a son. Neither one earned me a lick of kindness from that town. They prefer stories to truth." He nodded. "Stories are easier to control." The next morning, Martha rode to town. She wasn't hiding. That wasn't her way. The streets were still half buried in snowdrifts, but enough folks milled about to turn heads when she dismounted. The sheriff was outside his office, sipping coffee that steamed in the crisp air. He was a bear of a man named Hal McCready, decent. When sober, mean when not. He spotted Martha and tipped his hat. "Belle." "Sheriff, storm spit a body on your porch, or are the rumors true?" Martha met his eyes without flinching. He was half frozen. "Would have died if I'd left." "Him?" "Don't doubt it." A pause, then, "Still, you know how folks get." "People were always going to talk," she said. "Now they've got something juicy." Hal scratched his beard. "Could have said something. Asked for help." "I don't need help," she said. "I need them to mind their own business." "That's not how towns work, Martha." "No," she said. "It's how packs work." She left before he could reply. By the time she reached the general store, the whispers had started. Two women near the flour sacks clutched their shawls tighter. A boy giggled behind the counter. Mr. Coble, the storekeeper, wouldn't meet her eyes when she paid for salt and tobacco. Outside, she saw them gathering near the church steps. Reverend Boone, Mrs. Perkins, and a few other townsfolk too bored or bitter to leave well enough alone. It wasn't long before the bell rang, and half the town wandered inside. Martha didn't go in. She already knew what they'd say. She returned home before noon. Luke was sitting upright now, carving something into the wood of the chair with a broken nail. They talking. She dropped her bundle onto the table, like hens on cider. "Should I leave?" "Won't matter," she said. "Once the fire's lit, they don't care who holds the match." That night she didn't sleep. The next morning the knock came early. Not a knock exactly, more like the sound of fists that wanted to be hammers. Luke opened his eyes at the "Noise." "Stay there," she muttered, grabbing the rifle. She opened the door to see 6 people on her porch. Sheriff McCready, Reverend Boone, Mrs. Perkins, and 3 others. All wore the same expression, tight-lipped righteousness with a twist of smug. "Morning," Hal said. "Is it?" He cleared his throat. "There's been a meeting. Folks are concerned." "I'm sure they are." Boone stepped forward, ringing, his hat in his hands. "You've always been a woman of pride, Martha. Strong. But pride can lead a soul astray." Martha's eyebrow arched. "You come to quote scripture or start a sermon on my porch. This situation, this man, you must see how it looks, how it reflects on your soul character." Mrs. Perkins sniffed. "A woman of virtue would never—" "I dragged a dying man in from the snow," Martha snapped. "Next time I'll let God sort him early." "You're alone," Boone said. "No chaperone. He stayed in your home for days. The town—" Des scandalized. "The town should shovel its own walk before it critiques mine." Hal raised a hand. "This doesn't have to be ugly, but folks want closure. They want propriety." "Say what you mean." Boone's voice dropped. "Marry the man, make it right." Martha laughed. The sound was dry as kindling. "You're serious." "You'll be cast out," Agatha said. "Refused service, refused worship. You'll be marked as immoral." "And marrying a stranger cures all that?" Boone nodded. "We already spoke with him. He's agreeable. Martha blinked. You what? He said he would stand by the decision if you agreed. Her blood boiled. She stepped inside without a word. Luke was still on the cot, watching. He didn't look surprised. You agreed, she asked, voice low. I didn't want to cause more trouble. You are the trouble. I'm trying to fix it. By agreeing to own me like I'm cattle. He stood slowly, favoring one leg. That's not what I meant. Her eyes burned. You men always don't mean things right before you ruin someone's life. They gave me a choice. Marry you or get handed over to bounty men for desertion. I figured staying meant I could protect you. I don't need protecting. He met her eyes. Maybe I do. That stopped her cold. A silence stretched between them. Outside, the porch creaked. I'll do it, Martha said loudly, but on one condition. The door creaked open. Name it, said the sheriff. I wear my own dress, and it'll be done here. No church, no town hall. If you want a performance, you can stand in the cold. Macready shrugged. Fair enough. They left her porch quiet again, but inside, something felt colder than any snow. That night, Martha stood by the mirror in her mother's faded wedding dress. The fabric was yellowed, the lace fraying. She stared at herself like a stranger. Luke stood a few feet away, wearing a borrowed coat, hair still damp from a wash. You sure? No, she said, but if they want a show, I'll give them one. She stepped out into the falling snow. The crowd was small but loud in spirit. Reverend Boone cleared his throat. Luke stepped beside her. The ceremony was short. A few words, a few nods. When the Reverend declared them man and wife, Luke didn't try to kiss her. He knew better. Martha turned to go back inside before the echoes of Amen had faded. Back in the warmth, she pulled off the dress and tossed it over, a chair. Luke stood awkwardly by the door. I didn't want this either, he said quietly. She poured herself a drink. But here we are. He looked at her. Do you think they'll leave us alone now? No, she said. They never do. He started to speak, but she waved him off. I need quiet. She sat by the fire. He joined her after a while. Silence. Stretching between them like a crack in glass. Outside, the wind began to rise again, and far off in the dark, hoofbeats echoed. The sky was clear, too clear. Not a cloud in sight, not a wisp of breath from the wind. Martha knew that kind of quiet didn't mean peace. It meant waiting. Something was holding its breath. She was up early, splitting kindling behind the cabin. The wedding had been 2 days. Ago. She hadn't spoken to Luke much since, not out of spite, just necessity. The words weren't ready yet, and she wasn't the sort to speak out of obligation. If he'd noticed her silence, he hadn't said a word about it. That morning she heard the sharp clack of boots on the porch, not heavy like the sheriff's, not light like a preacher's, something else, measured, confident. She wiped sweat from her brow, grabbed the rifle leaning near the shed, and stepped into the clearing. 3 men stood there, all dust and trail grime, long coats, spurs that didn't jingle. Their horses were winded, tied lazily to a post they hadn't asked to use. The man in front had a scar that curved from his left temple to the edge of his mouth, like someone had tried to carve the smirk off him and missed. "Morning, ma'am," the scarred man said. His voice was smooth but bored, like he was already imagining the next town over. "Looking for a fella named Luke Carver. Rode this direction, maybe 4 days back. You seen him?" Martha didn't blink. Plenty of men passed through. Storm. Came up sudden. Anyone out there's buried under a dozen feet by now. The man's head tilted bird-like. That a no? That's a no. Behind her, the cabin door creaked. Luke stood in the shadowed frame, hair unkempt, hand at his side, where the pistol usually sat. The other 2 men shifted slightly. The scarred man smiled. "Well now," he said. "Ain't that convenient?" Martha stepped sideways, blocking their view. "You boys got names?" "We do," the man said, "but they're the kind best left out of polite company. Let's just say we're here on a matter of unfinished business, Mr. Carver, and some decisions he made." Martha didn't lower the rifle. "He's not going anywhere." The man's smile faded a fraction. "That so?" "That's so." Luke stepped forward then, past her, his voice low. "Martha." She didn't move. "I need to talk to them. Like hell you do. I mean it." He gently rested a hand on the barrel of her rifle, pushing it just enough to break the aim. "I've got this." She stared at him for a moment, then stepped back. Luke turned to the three strangers. "You got what you came to say it. But you don't touch her. You don't step past that fence." The scarred man's smile came back. "Ain't interested in her. This is between you and the law." "You know what happens to deserters, Luke?" Luke didn't flinch. "Yeah, I do. You left a colonel with a hole in his throat and 2 witnesses dead." Luke's jaw twitched. "That colonel ordered his men to torch a village full of women and children. Said they were harboring outlaws. There were no outlaws there, just farmers. And one old woman that tried to hand me bread." "You know what they call that in uniform?" the man asked. Luke nodded. "Disobedience." The man pointed a gloved hand at him. "Treason. Court-martial's too kind. They sent us to collect." "You, Luke, dead or alive?" Martha stepped forward again. "Try it." The man looked her up and down, amused. "You sure about that?" She didn't blink. "Try it and see." Something passed between them, an unspoken dare, razor-edged. Then the scarred man chuckled. "Ain't today, sweetheart. We'll let you 2 newlyweds enjoy your cabin for another night, but we'll be back with more. You bought him some time, but not a pardon." They remounted, turned, and rode back, toward the hills without another word. Martha didn't lower the rifle until they were specks on the horizon. Inside, Luke poured himself water with trembling hands. He sat at the edge of the table, elbows on knees, head bowed. "You should have told me," she said. "I figured I wouldn't make it through the storm." "You didn't," he smiled without humor. "Fair. I don't like being blindsided." No." She sat across from him. The silence was heavier now, but more honest. "You think they'll really come back?" she asked. "Yeah, not just those 3. They'll bring others." Martha leaned back. "Then we prepare." "You mean run?" "I mean dig in," Luke blinked. "You'd fight for me after all this?" "I didn't marry you to save face," she said. "But now that they've made it real, I'll be damned if I let someone take my husband off my land in a pine box." Luke let out a soft, stunned breath. "Hell!" She stood, already pulling down her hunting traps from the wall. "Let's make the welcome real unfriendly." They spent the rest of the day setting up, barbed wire in the brush near the corral, broken bottles buried neck up near the windows. They nailed planks over the back entry and dug shallow trenches near the shed. They didn't talk much, the work was their conversation. By nightfall, they were both covered in dirt and sweat, but the place looked less like a cabin and more like a last stand. That night, over a shared bottle of rye, Luke finally asked, "Why are you doing this?" Martha stared into the fire. "Because I've buried too many good men, and because I'm tired of people thinking a woman out here can't make her own choices." He nodded slowly. "And me? What choice are you making?" She didn't answer. Right away, finally, she said, "I don't hate you, that's a start." They sat in silence, firelight flickering across their faces. The next day was too quiet. Even the crows kept their distance. Around noon, Martha spotted the dust cloud in the distance. 8 riders. Not bounty men anymore, hired guns, the kind that didn't ask questions or leave witnesses. She didn't say a word, just handed Luke a rifle. They took their positions, Martha on the roof, Luke crouched near the window with a view of the front approach. The riders came slow, deliberate, letting the sound of hooves fill the air like a war drum. Then the leader called out, "It was the scarred man again. You sure about this, Luke? You gonna die for your pride?" "No," Luke said, stepping into view. "I'm gonna kill for my freedom," the man laughed. "Well, ain't that poetic?" And then the shooting started. Martha dropped the first one with a clean shot to the chest. Luke took out another through the gut. The others scattered, fanning out behind trees and brush, firing wild. Bullets tore through the front window. Wood splinters flew. Martha rolled across the roof, reloading, breath sharp in her lungs. Luke returned fire, ducking low. One of the hired guns made a break for the side, trying to flank. Martha nailed him mid-stride. Smoke filled the cabin. The heat of gunpowder, the metallic taste of fear, it all swirled into one breathless haze. Another rider charged the porch. Luke stepped out and shot him point-blank. But then something snapped, a shot rang out, and Luke dropped to his knees. "Luke!" Martha scrambled down, heart pounding, slipping through the side door. He was bleeding from the arm, trying to reload. "I'm fine," he grunted. She helped him up, dragging him behind the table. "We can't stay inside," he said. "They'll burn it!" "They won't get the chance." She grabbed the lantern from the mantel, opened the side window, and threw it hard. Flames erupted across the front yard where they'd soaked oil earlier. The fire caught fast, creating a wall of smoke and heat that forced the remaining riders back. Two tried to ride around. Martha grabbed Luke's revolver and met them at the side. She shot one through the throat, and Luke, despite his wound, took down the last with a shot that cracked across the plains like thunder. Then it was quiet. Only the sound of burning oil, groaning horses, and the hiss of blood on snow. Martha walked slowly through the yard, checking bodies. No one stirred. The beer. Scarred man lay near the corral, coughing blood. She stood over him. "You were right," he wheezed. "She's a real storm." Martha said nothing. He laughed once, then went still. By sunset, the flames had died. Martha helped Luke inside, tore strips from her apron, and bound his arm. "You should rest," she said. "So should you." "I will." They sat beside each other, leaning against the wall, exhausted. Luke broke the silence. "I never meant to bring this to your door." "I know. I just wanted to vanish." "You didn't." She looked at him, eyes soft now, the hard edge dulled. "You're part of this place now," she said. "For better or worse," he nodded. "I'll take it." They didn't speak after that. Just listened to the wind brushing through the trees, the sound of a world still turning. Outside, night fell heavy and cold, but inside the cabin, the fire burned warm. Dawn broke slow and grey over the plains, dragging long shadows across blood-stained snow. The cabin stood silent, battered and soot-smudged, but standing. Smoke curled from the stovepipe like a surrender flag made of warmth. Inside, Martha moved with quiet purpose, gathering what supplies remained, restocking ammo, stitching new cloth over the window holes. Luke sat at the table, his wounded arm now bound in clean linen, watching her work. His face was drawn, lips cracked, but his eyes had changed, no longer hunted, no longer drifting. There was something rooted in him now. He belonged to the moment. "I never asked," he said finally, breaking the hush. "Why did you really pull me out of the snow?" She didn't stop tying the bandage knots on a satchel. "Because I didn't want another ghost on my land." He nodded then, "But you let me stay." Martha glanced at him. "You stayed quiet, didn't touch anything that wasn't yours. You listened. That's rare in a man." He smirked, but it faded. "I don't want to bring more trouble. You didn't bring it," she said, slinging the satchel over her shoulder. "The world's full of it already. You just pulled the mask off." She walked to the door, rifle slung across her back, and paused. "They'll send more." "I know. They'll come louder this time, bigger. Real soldiers, not bounty hunters." She turned, arms folded. "Then I stopped being just a widow with a gun." Luke stood. He winced, but didn't show weakness. "I'm not leaving." Martha's eyes didn't soften. "Didn't ask you to." They spent the next hours preparing the land like it was a living thing that needed armor. They reinforced the trenches, buried jars filled with black powder beneath frost-hardened dirt, and rigged the barn doors with traps that would trigger if kicked. Martha's motions were swift and practiced. Luke worked beside her, slower, careful, with his arm but determined. That night, over fire-roasted meat and boiled coffee, they spoke in short, meaningful bursts. No poetry, just the truth. "I was 17 when I left Georgia," Luke said, voice low. "Thought a uniform meant something. Thought killing bad men would make me a good one." Martha leaned back, staring at the ceiling beams. "I was 16 when I married. Thought it'd stop the whispers. It didn't. Then I had my boy. For a while that was enough. Then sickness took him and the town didn't even bring a plate of food. Just condolences wrapped in pity." Luke stared at her. "That's why you fight." "I fight," she said, "because every time I didn't, someone else paid the price." They didn't speak for a while after that. Words were too small for the silence they shared. The next morning the dust rose early. before the sun had finished warming the frost. Luke spotted it from the lookout perch above the barn. 3 riders at first, then 5 more, then wagons, then cavalry colors. He dropped to the floor, face grim. Companies arrived. Martha didn't ask how many. She didn't need the number. The sound of wheels crunching through icy gravel was loud enough. When the soldiers reached the edge of the property, Martha stood on her porch, rifle in hand. Luke at her side. The lead rider, a tall man in full military regalia, dismounted with practiced ease. He didn't remove his gloves. That was telling. "Mrs. Bell," he called. She didn't answer. "I am Major Crowder. I'm here to collect. A fugitive of the United States Cavalry. He goes by the name Luke Carver. I believe he's inside your home." Martha spat into the snow. "He's right here." Crowder raised a brow. "That simplifies things." "Does it?" The Major's lips tightened. "This is a matter of military justice." Martha's voice was calm, measured. "Then take it to a court, not to my doorstep with rifles and threats." Luke stepped forward. "I deserted. I admit it. But I did it because I was ordered to kill unarmed civilians. I refused. You can hang me for that if you want, but don't pretend it makes you just." Crowder didn't blink. "The law isn't always just, Carver. Sometimes it's just necessary." "I've had enough of necessary men," Martha said. "You come for him, you walk through me." Crowder sighed. "This doesn't need to be bloodshed." Then turn around. The Major signaled. Soldiers fanned out, boots crunching, rifles aimed. Luke whispered, "Martha—" "No," she said. "No more running." A shot cracked. Not from the soldiers, from Martha. The blast hit the dirt inches from Crowder's feet. He didn't flinch. "Last chance." "No," she said again. Everything exploded. Gunfire lit the air like fireworks. Martha dove behind the woodpile, her rifle already cocked. Luke grabbed the pistol from his belt, shooting from behind a trough. Bullets tore through the porch beams, splinters flying. A soldier went down near the well, blood soaking into snow. The barn doors blew outward with a roar. One of the traps had triggered, sending flames and shrapnel into the advancing flank. Horses screamed, panicked, pulling at their reins. Martha moved like a storm, firing, reloading, firing again. No hesitation, no fear. Luke took a bullet to the leg, but didn't go down. He crawled behind a rain barrel and kept firing. One soldier charged the cabin door. Martha met him with the butt of her rifle, cracking his jaw, then shooting him point blank as he dropped. Smoke thickened. Yells turned to screams. Martha moved through it all like a shadow. She didn't see faces, just threats, silhouettes, movement. The sound of Luke's gun, even wounded, never stopped. Then it was quiet. Just wind. A soft groan. The creak of a broken wagon wheel. Martha stepped into the clearing, breathing hard. Bodies lay scattered. A few soldiers staggered away, dragging wounded comrades. Major Crowder was among them, bleeding from a wound in his thigh, supported by another man. "You should have walked away," Martha said. Crowder looked at her, wild-eyed. You're insane." She didn't argue. She just watched as he was hauled onto a wagon and driven off. No one tried to fight anymore. As the last of them disappeared over the ridge, Martha lowered her rifle. Her hands trembled, but only slightly. Luke limped toward her, legs soaked in red, but still upright. She caught him before he could fall. "Thought you said you didn't need protecting," he said through gritted teeth. "I don't." He smiled faintly. "You saved me anyway." Martha helped him inside, laid him down, stitched the wound herself. Her hands were steady now, efficient. When it was done, she collapsed into the chair beside the stove. For the first time in days, the land outside was still. "You know they'll send more," Luke said softly. "I know." "How you gonna keep fighting?" Martha looked at the cracked walls, the bullet holes, the burn scars in the wood. And then she looked at him. "I'm not fighting for you anymore," she said. He blinked. "I'm fighting for us." The words hit. Like a hammer, solid, unexpected, final. Luke exhaled. "You really mean that?" She nodded. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, gentle now, like it was tired too. They sat there side by side, broken but breathing, wrapped in a silence that no longer felt empty. Later, as the stars rose above the still land, Martha stood at the doorway watching the horizon. The firelight danced behind her. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. Her storm had passed, and she'd weathered it, not because she was alone, but because she'd chosen to stand, and someone had finally chosen to stand with her. The wedding dress looked like a relic from another century. Lace yellowed at the edges, hem caked with dust, sleeves too long for her thin, freckled wrists. Eleanor Walker stood alone at the edge of the altar, her spine straight despite the weight of 60 years and the silence of 100 watching eyes. The groom was gone. No note, no explanation, just a trail of boot prints in the dirt and a town full of whispers already turning to laughter. Someone spat into the dirt near the church steps. A young man muttered, "Too old for even desperation," and the chuckle that followed rolled through the crowd like tumbleweed. Ellie's hands trembled only slightly as she adjusted her veil. She didn't cry. Her jaw locked tight. She gave them no tears, no drama, no begging, just a quiet nod, as if this too was something she could weather. She turned from the altar, heels clicking softly on the wood, and walked down the steps, alone. In the shadow of the general store's awning, Jonas Kerr watched with flinty eyes. He hadn't come to town for this spectacle. He needed grain and spare parts for the wagon. But something about the woman in white rooted him to the spot. She reminded him of ghosts, not the kind that rattled chains, but the ones that sat quiet, at the edge of your bed when no one else was left. His late wife had worn white too, not that shade though. Her dress had been simple, sewn from curtains and hope. She'd died 7 winters ago. Fever came fast and stayed long. Jonas had buried her behind the farmhouse beneath a cottonwood tree that bloomed too late every spring. Now, as the crowd dispersed, muttering about wasted Sundays and foolish women, Jonas turned back toward his wagon. But fate had a mean way of pulling at a man when he least expected it. Ellie Walker sat on the church steps alone, veil shoved into her lap like discarded tissue. She was humming, a low, tuneless sound, more vibration than melody. Her eyes were dry but red-rimmed, her spine still impossibly straight. "Ma'am," Jonas muttered under his breath, annoyed that his boots were already carrying him toward her. She didn't look up until he spoke louder. "Ma'am," she raised an eyebrow, "you here to gawk like the others?" "No." He hesitated. "Didn't seem right. You sit in there alone. Figured I'd enjoy the view before I'm run out of town for lowering the moral average." Her voice was dry as the prairie wind. "You can save your pity. It wrinkles worse than I do." He almost smiled. "I don't pity you, just figured you might be hungry." She studied him, eyes narrowing like she was trying to place him in a ledger. "You from around here?" "Outside of town. Got a farm. Ain't much. You always." "So this charming?" "No, usually worse." She snorted, stood slowly, and smoothed her ruined gown. "Well then, farmer, thank you for the courtesy, but I'll manage. I always do." He nodded, tipped his hat, and turned away. But that voice, sandpaper wrapped in silk, followed him down the street. By the time he finished loading the last of the flour into his wagon, the storekeeper leaned over the counter and said, "Ain't your business, but that woman's got out. Nothing. Not even the gold she brought for her dowry. Groom ran off with it, slipped out last night." Jonas grunted. "Shame," the man continued, shaking his head. "Folks think she's mad for trying. 60 and still hoping for a husband? She should have stayed back east, joined a quilting circle." Jonas said nothing. He climbed onto the wagon bench, reins in hand, but the words clung like dust to his throat. He looked toward the church steps again. She was gone. He passed her on the outskirts of town, walking slow but steady along the trail, dress dragging behind her like a ghost's train. He didn't stop right away. Took him a full minute before he pulled the wagon to a halt, exhaled, hard, and looked skyward like the clouds might offer advice. He turned back and called out, "You headed anywhere in particular?" She didn't break stride. "Away. That's a direction, not a place. Place don't matter. Wherever I go, they already have a story about me. Might as well be a fresh one." He stepped down. "I got a place needs cleaning. A boy needs raising. Meals to be made. I ain't offering love or romance, just a roof and an honest day's work." She stopped walking. He added, "You'll earn your keep. It ain't charity." She turned. "You always propose to women like this?" I didn't say anything. "About marriage." She smirked. "Good. 'Cause after today I'm off weddings." They stared at each other for a long beat. Two scarred, tired souls testing the silence between them. I'm Jonas Kerr. Eleanor Walker. Call me Ellie. He nodded toward the wagon. Well, Ellie, you ride up front or hang on back. She climbed aboard, gathered her dress in a bunch, and settled beside him with a heavy sigh. Guess this counts as the honeymoon. Don't push your luck. As the wagon creaked forward, the town faded behind them, swallowed by sun and heat. Ellie stared ahead, not looking back once. Jonas glanced at her sidelong. You cook? Better than I shoot. You shoot? Only when it's necessary. Huh. They didn't talk for a while. The horses' hooves provided the only rhythm. Dust kicked up in steady beats, like a slow heartbeat steadying after a long sprint. By dusk, they rolled into the homestead. It was simple. Wood slats, crooked fences, a chimney that leaned slightly to the left, a porch with a rocking chair. That never rocked. And there on that porch sat a boy with tangled hair and wary eyes. Benji stood up slowly, squinting against the sun. Pa, Jonas raised a hand. This is Ellie. She'll be staying for a while. Benji blinked. She's dressed like a bride. Ellie smiled gently. That's because I was one, briefly. Then I wasn't. Now I'm something else entirely. The boy frowned. You a witch? Jonas sighed. Benji, don't be rude, she chuckled. Only on Thursdays. That earned a laugh. A real one. The boy stepped down and circled her like a suspicious pup. I don't trust ladies in dresses, he muttered. Well, Ellie said, stepping down, I don't trust boys who don't wash their necks. We'll call it even. Inside, the house smelled of dry wood and old tobacco. Jonas showed her the guest room, small, plain, bed made of rough wool and fur. She unpacked what little she had, a journal, a brooch, and a single photograph of her. As a young woman, she placed it face down. At dinner, the silence was thick enough to spread on bread. Benji poked at beans. Jonas ate mechanically. Ellie cleared her throat. So what happened to his mother? Jonas paused. Fever, years back. And the boy? Found him wandering after an Apache raid. He don't remember much. Benji nodded, chewing slowly. Pa says I showed up with bad luck and stuck around. Ellie met his eyes. I say bad luck comes and goes. Good people stay. Benji stared a long moment, then shrugged. You talk funny. Good. I don't plan to be forgettable. After the boy was in bed, Jonas lingered by the hearth while Ellie scrubbed the dishes. You don't have to stay, he said quietly. I know. He looked at her then, really looked. Why did you say yes? She dried her hands on her skirt. Because you didn't ask me to be young or pretty or quiet. You just asked me to help. He nodded slowly. And I said yes, she added, because I'm tired of being left behind. Outside, the wind rustled the porch boards. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, lonely and shrill. Ellie stood at the doorway, silhouetted, in lamp glow. You got a spare blanket? He tossed her one from the shelf. Their fingers brushed briefly. Thank you, she said, voice softer now. Get some rest, he replied. Tomorrow's early. As she closed the guest room door, he stared at the fire a moment longer. Maybe she was too old. Maybe she was broken. But so was he, and maybe, just maybe, two broken pieces could make something whole. Outside, the cottonwood swayed, and for the first time in 7 years, Jonas Kerr thought about planting something new. Morning came cold and quiet, a thick fog clinging to the ground like regret. Ellie stepped onto the porch with a worn shawl around her shoulders and a cast-iron skillet in one hand. She stood still for a long moment, staring out at the rugged hills and tired land stretched before her. The farmhouse behind her creaked, groaned, and settled with the wind as though it too were waking slowly after years of aching silence. Inside, Jonas stirred his coffee over the stove, expression as blank as the prairie sky. He'd said few words since she arrived, and fewer still that morning. Ellie wasn't offended. The silence of men like him wasn't empty, it was brimstone packed tight under pressure. Benji stumbled into the kitchen barefoot, yawning like a cat. He stopped mid-step when he saw her by the stove. His nose wrinkled. You cookin'? She didn't turn. Someone's gotta. Or would you prefer a diet of beans and disappointment? He crossed his arms. I like beans. Jonas grunted behind. His coffee. You like complaining more. Ellie slid eggs into the pan with a practiced hand, the sizzle breaking the tension. She didn't rush, didn't hover. She cooked like she'd done it for 60 years, and she had. Cooking, cleaning, surviving. That was the rhythm her life had danced to long before she'd ever considered boarding a train west. Benji lingered in the doorway, watching like a wary colt. You gonna stay long? That depends, she said. How you plan on hiding my shoes again? He looked sheepish. Maybe. Then I guess I'll stay until you run out of tricks. Jonas sipped his coffee, hiding a grin behind the mug. By noon, Ellie had unpacked, swept the floors, mended 2 ripped shirts and threatened to throw out an entire shelf of what she called expired masculinity. Jonas had offered a grunt of protest when she pulled down a set of broken tools. She countered with a raised brow and an old army term he hadn't heard since his cavalry days. You served? He asked, surprised. My brother did, she replied, dusting the windowsill. I did the cooking, the patching, and the burying. Jonas looked at her again, not just as the woman in the white dress from town, but something older, deeper. There was no softness in her past, no ease, and yet she carried herself like a candle still willing to burn. That night, as a storm rolled in low across the plains, thunder grumbling like a drunken preacher, Ellie sat on the porch with a shawl around her and a shotgun resting against her knees. She didn't ask for permission. She just took the seat beside the door, eyes scanning the hills. You expecting trouble? Jonas asked from inside. Always. That's how you avoid being surprised. He stepped out with a lantern, its light casting long shadows. You're not what I expected. You either. I figured a man who doesn't talk much must be hiding something. But you... She paused, watching lightning crawl across the sky. You're just empty, like a house too long unoccupied. Jonas didn't respond. He simply stood beside her and watched the storm roll over the land. Benji peeked out the window, eyes wide. Are you a witch or a soldier? Ellie looked back at him. Depends on the day, sugar. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm that was both strange and natural. Ellie made herself part of the house, not as a guest, not as decoration, but as a necessary force. She scrubbed the back porch, fixed a leaky roof tile, and wrangled the stubborn goat that Jonas had given up trying to pen. Benji was her greatest challenge. He trailed behind her at a distance, silent one moment and sassy the next. He asked too many questions. He stole her hairbrush. He put a toad in her washtub. Ellie responded not with anger, but with a kind of amused patience. She'd seen worse tantrums from grown men with broken ribs. One morning, she found him trying to read from a tattered book by the fireplace, lips moving clumsily around the words. You like stories? She asked. He shrugged. I like the ones with shooting. I like the ones with survivors. She sat beside him and picked up the book. Her voice was steady, warm, and the words seemed to settle in the space like dust motes dancing through sunlight. Benji didn't say thank you, he just listened. Jonas watched from the doorway, arms crossed, unreadable. That night, after the boy had gone to bed, Jonas leaned against the hearth. You've done more for him in a week than I managed. In 3 years. You gave him a roof, Ellie said, a place to grow. He's afraid to. So are you. Jonas stared at the dying fire. I buried my wife here. Figured I'd die here, too. Ellie stood slowly. Well, I ain't here to replace her, but I won't let either of you rot while waiting for ghosts. He met her eyes. There was no challenge there, just truth. And for Jonas Kerr, truth hurt more than any knife. The next morning brought blood. Feathers littered the yard like fallen snow. The henhouse door hung open, its latch broken, and 2 chickens lay torn apart, red staining the dirt. Jonas cursed, under his breath checking the fence line. Damn coyote. I'll get the rifle, Ellie said, already halfway to the porch. You shoot? I'm not just a pretty face. By dusk, the sun bruised the sky purple. Ellie sat still as stone, behind the coop, rifle resting on her knee. Jonas hadn't asked her to. He hadn't needed to. She was just there, part of the defense. When the coyote came back, she didn't flinch. It slipped through the brush like a shadow, lean and hungry. The rifle barked once, clean and hard. The animal dropped without a sound. Jonas jogged up seconds. Later, breath caught short. You, right behind the eye, she said, lowering the gun. That's where the fear lives. He stared. You've done this before. I've survived more than coyotes. They dragged the body away and buried it out past the fence. Benji watched from the barn, eyes wide. She's not just a bride ghost, he whispered. She's a gunslinger. Ellie winked. Only when provoked. That night Jonas made coffee and poured her the first cup. She took it without a word and sipped, staring into the fire. He cleared his throat. You ever have kids? No. Her eyes stayed on the flames. Had a baby once, born too soon. Buried him under a dogwood in Tennessee. He didn't speak. Just sat beside her. I married late, she said. A traveling preacher. He died 2 winters in, fever. Same as mine, Jonas murmured. They sat in the glow of shared sorrow, silence folding around them like a quilt. Benji snored lightly from the next room. Outside, the wind settled. You miss her? Ellie asked softly. Every day. Me too. But I think they'd both hate what we've become. Quiet, bitter, dead while still breathing. Jonas looked at her then, really looked, not as a woman who'd been abandoned, not as a hand around the house, but as someone who understood pain and carried it like a badge. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. Their hands brushed on the couch. Neither pulled away, but the moment passed. She stood and stretched. Tomorrow I start on the laundry. You've got shirts that could walk off on their own. He chuckled, a rare, warm sound. Good luck with the barn clothes. As she stepped toward her room, he called out softly, Ellie. She turned. I'm glad you stayed. She smiled just a little. Me too. When her door closed, Jonas stared into the fire again. The house didn't feel so empty anymore. It breathed. It remembered. Outside, the moon climbed high over the plains. But deep in the woods, shadows shifted. A set of eyes blinked in the dark, fixed on the quiet farmhouse. The night was calm, but trouble was watching. The morning air had a sharp edge to it, the kind of cold that felt like a warning. Jonas stood on the porch, sharpening his knife, the rhythmic scraping against stone steady and patient. Ellie watched from the kitchen window, hands deep in a bowl of biscuit dough. She had a knack for noticing things most people missed. How Jonas's shoulders tensed just slightly, how his eyes kept drifting to the tree line, how the wind had carried something uneasy since dawn. Benji, still in his nightshirt, wandered in from the hallway with sleep-clouded eyes and a wild tangle of hair. He mumbled something about pancakes and scratched his head. There's bacon, Ellie said, flipping the pan with one hand. But if you want pancakes, you're stirring the batter yourself. He gave her a look of deep betrayal, then shuffled to the counter with a sigh. Men around here are spoiled, she muttered. That's 'cause you spoil us, Benji replied through a yawn. The sound of hooves cracked the calm like a whip. Jonas straightened on the porch. Ellie heard it too. 3 riders fast approaching from the east trail. Not neighbors, too fast, too deliberate. She wiped her hands and reached for the rifle leaning against the pantry. Jonas didn't go for his gun. Not yet. He waited until the riders came into view, their horses kicking up dust like they were tearing, a scar into the earth. The lead man wore a long duster and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His face was leathered, his grin worse. Jonas Kerr, the man called, voice like gravel soaked in whiskey. Ain't it been a long time? Jonas didn't answer. The man kept talking. Heard you got yourself a little homestead, heard you got some help around here now. That true? Jonas spoke low. Go inside, Ellie. She didn't move. The second rider spat tobacco into the dirt. Ain't polite to keep company waitin'. Jonas's voice was steel. What do you want, Trig? The grin widened. Just came to collect. You remember that little problem we had back in Prescott? The gambling debt, the man you left bleedin' in the street. That was 15 years ago. Funny how money don't care about time. Benji had crept to the doorway, peeking past the frame. Ellie pulled him back gently, whispering, Get your things. Hide under the floorboards like Jonas taught. Hugh. The boy hesitated. Now, she said, low but firm. He vanished like a breath. Back outside, Trig dismounted and took a slow step forward. His hand rested near his belt, fingers tapping just beside his holster. I'm here to make it. Right, Jonas. One way or another. You give me the deed or we burn this place down and pick through the ashes for anything worth taking. Jonas didn't blink. You come here with threats, you leave with regrets. Trig chuckled. That's supposed to be poetry. Ellie stepped. Onto the porch, rifle cradled in her arms like a baby she didn't plan to let cry. Trig raised an eyebrow. This your woman? She's the one who'll put you in the ground, Jonas said. The second rider, young, twitchy, snorted. She looks like she's got one foot there herself. Ellie didn't speak. She aimed. Next one of you insults me, I put a hole in something that matters. A long silence followed. Even the horses seemed to stop breathing. Trig raised both. Hands mock surrender. No need to get feisty, ma'am, we're just talking. You ain't talking, you're trespassing, Jonas said. Now ride on. Trig studied them both, then gave a slow nod. We'll be back, Jonas. Don't wait too long to make up your mind. Next time we won't come knocking so gentle. The three men rode off, dust trailing behind them like smoke. Jonas stared after them until the trail vanished. Inside, Ellie lowered the rifle and took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from memory. Old debts, she asked. Very old. How bad? Bad enough they might come back at night, might not knock. Ellie nodded once. Then we get ready. That evening, the house turned into a war camp. Benji helped stack firewood near the windows. Ellie reinforced the barn door with scrap iron. Jonas repaired the hinges on the storm shutters and filled canteens. Dinner was fast and silent. Ellie sat sharpening knives while Benji cleaned the rifle under her guidance. You ever kill anyone? The boy asked suddenly. Ellie didn't look up. I don't count, but I've survived. He nodded, as if that answer satisfied a question he didn't know how to ask. After the boy was asleep, Jonas sat with Ellie by the hearth, the fire crackling low between them. You didn't have to stay, he said. I know. They'll come again, this time with fire. She met his eyes. Then we meet them with steel. Jonas stared into the flames. You're not afraid? Terrified, she admitted. But that's not the same as being unwilling. He looked at her, truly looked at the lines on her face, the strength in her voice, the unspoken years in her silence. You were never just a bride, he said quietly. I was never just anything. He nodded. Thank you. For what? For reminding me how to stand again. The night crept in slow and heavy. At dawn, they came. 3 riders had become 6, faces wrapped in bandanas, torches in hand. The first shot cracked through the morning like a whip. Benji was already under the floorboards. Ellie fired from the front window, hitting a rider's shoulder and sending him tumbling off his horse. Jonas opened fire from the barn, picking off a second man trying to flank. The attackers weren't prepared for resistance. They thought this would be easy. They thought the woman in the white dress was weak. They were wrong. The leader, Trig, shouted curses, rallying the rest. He lobbed a torch onto the porch, flames licking across the boards. Ellie kicked it off with a boot and shot the man who tried to light another. Her eyes burned with fury and firelight. Jonas moved like a man possessed, reloading without pause, each shot finding its mark. But it was Ellie who turned the tide. As 2 men rushed the door, she stepped out with an axe in hand and eyes like winter storms. The first man hesitated, just enough. She swung low and fast, dropping him like a sack of wheat. The second froze, stared, and then turned to run. Trig, bleeding from the thigh, crawled toward his horse. Jonas stood over him, revolver aimed at his head. You lost, he said. Trig grinned, even in defeat. It's just money, Jonas. Ain't no need to kill over money. Jonas's finger tightened on the trigger. Then Ellie spoke behind him. Don't waste a bullet. Let the buzzards finish what his soul already started. Jonas stared at the man, then lowered the gun. Get off my land, he said, and tell the others this place don't break easy. Trig limped to his horse and vanished into the hills. The silence afterward was deafening. Smoke curled from the burned porch. Blood stained the dirt. Ellie leaned on the axe, breath heavy. Jonas walked to her and steadied her elbow. You all right? She nodded slowly. I'm tired of burying things, Jonas. But if I have to, I'll bury every threat that comes to this door. Benji climbed out from the trapdoor, wide-eyed and awestruck. You're like a ghost warrior, he whispered. Ellie crouched down to his level. I'm like your ma now. That okay with you? He nodded fast. Jonas stood quietly, watching the 2 of them. Later, as they patched the porch and cleaned the blood from the steps, Jonas asked, Why'd you do it? What? Risk everything. Ellie looked up at him. Because you let me be more than a burden, more than a woman past her prime. You gave me something to defend. Jonas looked at her for a long moment, then leaned down and kissed her forehead. It wasn't a passionate kiss. It was quiet, deep, an understanding sealed by fire. That night, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars. Ellie's dress was torn, her hands blistered, her eyes heavy, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. Jonas took her hand in his. You're not too old. Not for this. Not for us. She smiled faintly. Neither are you. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the hills, coyotes howled, but the house was still, stronger now. Inside, Benji slept soundly, dreaming of peach cobbler and a woman who could fight like thunder, and for the first time in a very long while, none of them felt haunted. But just over the horizon, a pale cough echoed into her handkerchief, stained faintly red. Ellie looked at it, folded it, and tucked it away without a word. Not yet. Not today. There was still life left to live. The prairie was gold in the morning light, soft and alive with the hum of summer. A breeze stirred the dry grasses, bending them like a sea of whispers. The farmhouse stood sturdy now, patched, painted, and no longer sagging under years of neglect. Jonas stepped onto the porch with a coffee tin in hand and an ache in his knees that reminded him how long it had taken to get here. Inside, Ellie folded laundry with practiced care. She still moved like a woman born before the turn of the century, all economy and resolve. But her movements had slowed some. Her cough had grown sharper, heavier, and though she never once complained, Jonas heard it like a bell tolling in the background of every quiet moment. Benji thundered through the hall, a carved wooden horse clutched in one hand, hair sticking up like wild feathers. "Ma!" he shouted, breathless. "There's a crow stuck in the fence." "Here it's pecking mad and won't let go." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "And you came to me instead of fixing it?" "I was gonna, but he's got this mean look, like he's got a gun or something." She laughed, low and wheezy. "Fine. Let's see about your outlaw crow." She draped a shawl over her shoulders and stepped outside, boots kicking dust. Jonas watched from the porch, her silhouette framed against the sky, strong despite the illness she refused to name. She worked alongside the boy, coaching him with calm wisdom and dry wit, until the crow took off with an angry flap and an indignant squawk. Later she sat on the porch steps, wind-tugging strands of silver hair loose from her bun. Jonas handed her a tin cup. "You're good with him," he said. She sipped slow. "He's good with me." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the kind that only comes after war has been survived and peace has been earned. The peace didn't last. The news came with the preacher's wife, who arrived on a borrowed mare, her face pale and set like stone. She dismounted with a sharp motion and went straight to Jonas. "There's a new lawman in town. He's asking questions about you. About Ellie, too. Says he's here to settle things that didn't get finished in Prescott." Jonas's mouth tightened. "Name?" "Marshal Clint Harlan." The name sat in Jonas's gut like lead. Harlan wasn't law. He was vengeance wrapped in a badge, a bounty hunter made legal. He'd worked with Trigg once, long ago. If he was here, it meant someone had stirred up old ghosts. Ellie came to stand beside Jonas, catching the tension in his jaw. "This isn't like the others." "No," he said, "it isn't." "Then we handle it," she replied, eyes clear. But Jonas wasn't so sure. That evening, as the sun bled over the hills, they stood together inside the barn. Jonas unwrapped a small oiled cloth revealing his old cavalry revolver and a badge worn smooth by years of being hidden. Ellie watched him quietly. "You were law once?" He nodded. "Briefly. Until I realized the law didn't mean much out here. Justice is slower than bullets." She nodded slowly. "You plan on using that gun again?" "I hope not." Ellie reached into her sewing kit and pulled out something he hadn't seen in weeks, her wedding dress. Torn, yellowed, and patched, she had folded it neatly, kept it safe. She held it out to him. "I want to wear it again," she said. He looked at her, confused. "We never did it proper," she explained. "We live like we're married. We work like it, love like it. I want to say the words, and I want Benji to see it." Jonas stared at her, then slowly took the dress. Then we'll do it right. The next morning the town gathered with wary curiosity. Word had spread. Jonas Kerr, the widowed settler, was marrying the ghost bride they all once mocked. The woman who'd been left at the altar was walking down the aisle again. Ellie walked through the church doors in that same dress, now mended with thread, love and grit. She walked without shame, without apology. She met every eye with the calm of someone who'd already buried their worst days. Benji stood proud beside Jonas at the altar, jacket 2 sizes too big and hair combed lopsided. The preacher's voice trembled at first, but found its footing as the couple joined hands. "You take this woman?" "I do," Jonas said, voice firm. "And do you, Eleanor, take this man?" "I already have," she said with a small smile. "But yes, I do." The rings were simple, the vows were short. But when Jonas leaned in and kissed her, the whole church held its breath. Outside, wildflowers blew in the wind and the sky opened wide with promise. But not everyone clapped. A figure leaned against a post near the livery stable, eyes narrowed. Under a dust-coated hat, Clint Harlan, the new lawman. Watching, waiting. He tipped his hat when Jonas saw him, a silent message. "We're not done." The celebration ended early. Back at the homestead, Ellie hung her dress in the bedroom and let her shoulders sag. The cough took her again, this time deep and rattling. Jonas caught her elbow, steadying her. "You need rest. I need you to listen." She sat him down on the bed and pulled a folded letter from her apron. "It's for Benji. When the time comes. Not now. Not yet." Jonas's jaw clenched. "Don't talk like that." "I'm not dying today," she said gently. "But I've known my body a long time. It's slower now, and some mornings it feels like my bones have already started saying goodbye." He held her hand tightly, rough fingers wrapped around hers. "We've still got time. Then let's make the most of it." They spent the next 2 days rebuilding the fence, fixing the roof, baking peach pies. Benji learned to ride solo across the field and shot his first arrow through a hay bale. Ellie clapped like he'd won a war, and then the law came knocking. Clint Harlan rode up with 3 deputies, each one grim and quiet. He dismounted and strode to the porch. "Jonas Kerr, I've come to bring you in." "For what?" Jonas asked. "Murder, theft, and the abandonment of lawman's duty. You left Prescott after a gunfight. That town's still got holes in its walls from your war." "I left because staying would have meant more blood," Jonas replied calmly. Harlan's eyes flicked. To Ellie. "And you, conspiracy, harboring a fugitive. You helped Trigg before he died." Ellie stepped forward. "I buried him. That's the only help I gave him." Harlan's hand hovered near his holster. "You can argue all this in front of a judge, or you can resist and die right here." Jonas's voice was steady. "You know this isn't justice. This is revenge." "You don't get to decide that," Harlan said, stepping forward. That was when Benji shouted from behind the well, "Leave my ma and pa alone." He stood with his small rifle shaking like a leaf in a windstorm. Harlan scoffed. "Cute. Real cute." Jonas held out a hand. "Benji, it's all right, go inside." But Ellie had already moved. She stepped between Harlan and Jonas, her voice ringing clear. "You come here, claim your law, but you're just a man with old grudges and a tin badge. You want him? You go through me." Harlan hesitated. Something in her eyes, something calm, certain, final, gave him pause. "I don't want blood today," he said. Then ride on. For a moment it seemed he might, but one of the deputies reached for his gun. The shot cracked through the air. Ellie fired first. The deputy dropped, shoulder hit. Harlan's eyes went wide. Jonas drew his revolver and moved like the cavalryman he once was, knocking Harlan to the ground. A brawl broke out, gunfire, dust, shouting. But the family fought like they had something worth dying for. When it was done, 2 deputies had fled. One was wounded. Harlan lay in the dirt, groaning, gun kicked out of reach. Jonas stood over him. "You lost. You think this means anything?" Harlan spat. "You'll always be a ghost with a gun." Jonas lowered the hammer. "Better than a badge with a vendetta." Ellie stepped beside him. She looked down at the man, breathing heavy. Then she turned and walked inside. She didn't say a word for hours. That night after Benji was asleep, Jonas found her on the porch, wrapped in a quilt, eyes on the stars. "You were magnificent," he whispered. "I just did what needed doing." He sat beside her, arms around her shoulders. "What now?" "We live," she said. "We keep going, until I can't." He kissed her temple. "You'll go out fighting, won't you?" She smiled. "I already am." Weeks passed. The town heard the story and stayed quiet. No one came looking for Harlan. No more riders appeared. On the ridge, the farm kept on. One morning, Jonas woke to find Ellie staring out the window, a piece of parchment in her lap. She looked tired, beautiful, peaceful. "Jonas," she said softly, "would you do me a kindness? Anything. When the time comes, don't bury me in the churchyard. I want to rest by the cottonwood, with her, if she'll have me." He took her hand and held it tightly, and one day, quietly, she was gone. No drama, no sound, just a folded letter on the table and a peach pie cooling on the sill. Jonas buried her by the cottonwood. Benji carved the headstone himself. Eleanor Walker, Kirbride, Mother Warrior. She gave us what we didn't know we needed. Years later, they still told her story in town. The bride they laughed at, the ghost they feared, the woman who took a broken house and made it a home. And sometimes on quiet nights when the wind rustled the porch boards just so, Jonas swore he heard her laugh, sharp, strong, and entirely alive.